Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, possibly the best weekly podcast for CMOs and everyone else looking for innovative ways to transform their brand, drive demand, and just plain cut through, proving that B2B does not mean boring to business. Here's your host and Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
Hello, Renegade Thinkers. This is an unusual episode, and then it's just me. It's Drew on Drew. I figure after 229 episodes of me getting input, it'd be good for you to hear from me on what I've learned over the last year or so about how marketers have been succeeding despite the pandemic. And so question number one, how have you seen marketeers effectively market during COVID? And I'm going to break this down into 4 buckets, and let's start with the first bucket. And this is really about being essential. Think about it for a moment as, do I absolutely have to have this product or service to keep my business going? Now, if you aren't a hospital or let's say Zoom, which enabled everybody to talk in conferences together, or a security system that enabled everybody to work from home safely and securely. Those companies were by definition essential. You could have been anything to do with the cloud and you were essential. But what I want you to think about for a moment is, how is your business essential? I think that filter, first and foremost, is such a great way always to think about your business and your brand. We can't all be Zoom or Slack or Teams or those there. And we couldn't have all been part of 6 years of digital transformation in 6 months. But what are they going to do? What are these companies going to do? What's the next essential thing that they have to do? And this gets us to the second bucket. So, hey, Drew, what's the second thing that marketeers have done? And what they've done is they've gone to their current customers and they've said, hey, how can we help you in any way? So, and let's break that down a little bit. So first is, how are you using our product or service and are using it to its fullest potential? It's an interesting thought, to its fullest potential. Now, if you're a software company and you know, just think about all the apps that you have on your phone. Even take the camera feature. How many of those features are you using all the time? Or think about your apps. You probably only use 5 to 10% of them. So you're a software company and it's the middle of COVID and you go to your customers and you say, hey, how are you using our product or service? Are you getting the most out of it? How can we help you right now? I have a number of examples of companies that went to their customers. In some cases, they were hurting because they were in the travel business or something, and their business was down immediately. And what they said was, we know you're hurting. Let's extend your contract term. So maybe we can delay some payments, or we'll give you 2 or 3 months off, but you add a length to your contract. So that was part of it, is going to these customers and saying, what's your financial situation? Can I help you there? And then how are you using our product or service? And here what was amazing about that. A number of brands, and I can't name names, unfortunately, because these are confidential conversations that I've had with CMOs, went to their customers and discovered several ways that they could help their customers right now, actually help them get through the pandemic as a result of using their product or service a little more effectively and efficiently. In many cases, there was an upsell opportunity where they actually got that customer to say, oh, if I use this, I can get that much more out of it, and that will help me get through this. So this notion of going back to your customer right now couldn't be more important. So so far what we have are savvy marketers who first were lucky enough to be essential, or B, went back to their customers and said, how can we help you get through it? I remember this quote from one CMO who just said, all we tried to do was be helpful. We just kept creating content that would help them get through the initial crisis. And she said, the more we gave away, the more we sold. The more we gave away, the more we sold. The more helpful we were, the more we sold. So that's the second bucket, right? Is going to your customers and figuring out how you can help them. So Drew, what's the third bucket? And this is what I call the fast ones. These are the ones that pivoted and found a way to get a new product or service out there that could prove what people call speed to value. And here's the reason why this was so important, and I've mentioned this on other shows. What happened after COVID was the CFO. This is the CFO who said, I am not approving another expense unless you can A, show me it's essential, like to keep our business running, or B, and this is the important part, B, there's a fast speed to value. If our organization can't get value out of this new product or service in the next 3 months, put it on hold. Just come back to me. So these fast ones figured out a way to rush out a new product or service that was essential, that had a quick speed to value. In my interview with Stephanie Buscemi recently, literally a podcast came out last week, she mentioned how they rushed out in a 6 to 8 week period Work.com, which was designed to help their customers sort of deal with remote workforces. That's a great example of rushing something out that delivers quick value to your customers. Okay. TalkDesk did a similar thing where they initially launched right after COVID, maybe within 3 or 4 weeks, a free version of their product for call centers. Now, in our conversations, it turns out that was just an amazing way of getting new customers in the door, so that and many of them skipped the free stage. Other brands thought about light versions of their product, which didn't require the full enterprise integration. Perhaps they could get some rogue users inside the organization getting used to it. So again, this was creating products or services that had a lower barrier to start. Lower price, easier to use, less connectivity perhaps, but whatever it was, it got them in the door. Okay. The fourth one. Hey, Drew, what is the fourth approach that seemed to work really well? And I'm going to call that the patient ones. These are the folks that said, and this is kind of like what Renegade did, we're not going to be able to get any business in the next 3 months because, in fact, we can't define our business right now as essential. As hard as we wanted to say rebranding your product or service is essential, we knew that wasn't the conversation that marketers wanted to have. So we thought about planting seeds. What could we do today that would make friends and be helpful in a way so that 3 months or 6 months or 9 months from now, these same prospective customers could circle back? We'll call that the patient ones. They planted seeds to harvest later since they couldn't win the essential argument. Pluralsight is a website with training services. They had free April. And what was interesting about that, they launched the program as a patient idea, as a seed building idea, and they had thousands and thousands of course downloads. But an interesting thing happened to them. What a number of their customers, their enterprise customers, discovered that many of their employees were suddenly using and taking courses. So they expanded the licenses. So ironically, here they are giving away their product during free April, but it ended up driving sales. So it's amazing to think about. Sometimes free is a perfect way to sell your product. Another demand base for a short period of time, the ABM people offered free certification. You could get a bunch, which was at the time a brilliant move because it was, I don't know, they weren't certain if people would invest more in ABM during the economic crisis caused by the pandemic. It turned out they did, but just in case, they thought, well, let's build an army of users who understand how to use demand base so that when the market picks up, we will be in a good position. Sixth Sense is a brand that also Latany Conant was on the podcast, and she talked about all the ways that they could help CMOs get through the crisis. And they created these salons that built community among CMOs every Friday, one for the West Coast and one for the East Coast, where they would gather a speaker and a moderator and a bunch of CMOs would show up for this. And this was a terrific way of giving to the community, but it also made Sixth Sense top of mind and gave them an opportunity to talk about it. Sixth Sense had a very good year. So this approach of patient and planting seeds ended up applying to virtual events as well. Think about this for a moment. IBM used to charge for their conferences. Adobe did. All of these companies charged for their. Nobody charged. Well, I shouldn't say nobody. The analysts still charged, but everybody else gave away their conferences. And what they saw was that they had thousands more people attending their conferences, so forth. So lastly, in terms of patient ones, I want to reference Sprout Social. I interviewed Jamie Gilpin for one episode, and they have always, their model has been built around having a free product that social media users can take advantage of. Well, this was particularly helpful during the pandemic because it meant that they had trial among all sorts of business sizes. And within there were a number of enterprise users that were rogue, and ultimately the enterprise adopted it. So just think about what all of these things have in common is a real focus on the customer and the customer need. How can you help the customer? You can help them by being essential. You can help them by having a fast speed to value. You can help them by having a free product. Okay. So those are sort of the four big trends. Great place for us to take a break. We'll be right back. Hey, it's Drew, and I just wanted to do a quick mention of a new peer-to-peer advisory network I started last year called CMO Huddles. Every week, we bring together an elite group of CMOs to share, care, and dare each other to greatness. One CMO described Huddles as a cross between an executive workshop and a therapy session. If you're a B2B CMO and wish you could meet regularly with your smartest peers, just go to cmohuddles.com and book a time to talk to me to see if you'd be a good fit. Check it out at cmohuddles.com. All right, we're back. And here's another question for you, Drew. You mentioned virtual events in your last one. What happened with these? Well, it's really important to remember that in 2019, in-person events were considered the top source for quality leads for over half of all B2B marketers. So stop and think about that for a moment. Suddenly, as of March or April 2020, half of your leads evacuated. It just disappeared. It just gone. So suddenly everybody turned to virtual events as a place of replacement. Oh, by the way, we did some research in May among 133 B2B CMOs, and what we discovered was that most of them having to replace in-person events impacted 90% of the plans and was the single biggest driver of complexity. Now, here was an interesting thing that you don't often think about and is probably a good lesson from this whole experience. There was no early mover advantage in shifting to virtual events. I'm going to speak out of school here a bit, but IBM and Adobe rushed their virtual events. They were supposed to have physical events in March and April. Instead, they rushed out events in April. And unfortunately, these were not great events. They certainly weren't great events relative to what happened in the months that happened. The technology was unstable. There are a lot of rants that I could go on. The speaker quality wasn't really very good. It was one of those things where email looked more interesting to me than the event, than the presenters there, and which is really unfortunate. The good news is that virtual events got a lot better as the year went on. They had shorter sessions, more interactivity, more entertainment value. In some cases, they were less slick and more human. All of these things helped make virtual events a lot better. So, what advice do I have? Hey, Drew, what advice do you have in helping make virtual events even more engaging? Well, on Renegade.com, there's a demand, 6 tips for generating demand in a downturn, and one of the points goes deep into virtual events. And based on my interview with Michelle Beebe of Skillsoft, we isolated 13. But I'm going to give you a few of the things that I think are really important to making virtual events much more engaging. Okay, number 1, start by focusing on interactivity. You want to pull your audience early and often. You want to allow lots of times for Q&A. You want to have more, you want to have chat, and you want to make sure you support it. Lectures are boring, and they're really boring when they're just video where you're watching on your screen. Keep in mind, every time someone is watching your presenters on screen, they have the option of going to YouTube. They could go to Netflix. They could look at their messages. They could look at their email. You do not have the captured audience that you have at physical events. So you have to focus on interactivity. And I say that first because often people start by looking for a platform first. Figure out what your level of interactivity is, what your goal is there, then find the platform that can deliver it. Second thing, don't save the best for last. Start strong. I've seen so many webinars where there's this order. The president of the organization speaks, then the head of sales speaks, then the head of marketing speaks. You're halfway into it and you finally get to the customer who's really interesting and has a great story to tell. And then because the customer goes on a little long, there's like 3 minutes for questions, and there were 20 minutes of questions that people were waiting. They were actually interested in the content. What we suggest is flip that. Whatever is the best part of your program, put that first. Set the bar high so that if I come in and watch your conference or whatever it is, whether it's a webinar or a big virtual event, let me see your best first, because then I can expect that I might see more of that. So start strong, set the stage for the events. Number 2, or 3 actually, make it fun. I'm there for information, but remember, I'm watching a screen. I am somewhat passive unless you have some interactivity. Be sure to build some elements of fun into your program. Have a entertainer. Skillsoft had a great band. They had interesting authors. They changed the structure of where they were presenting from. One of their MCs had a funky hat on. They also had a points program, by the way, which was cool. So the more things that you did, you got points and that you could earn for swag. Okay. More live, less pre-recorded. I know that there are a lot of companies wanted to take the risk out of live streaming because there is a risk of live streaming. They wanted to have everything pre-recorded so that there was no chance things would get screwed up. The problem with that is it absolutely limits interactivity. And if it's pre-recorded, I don't have a sense of urgency that I need to watch it now. Now, I've seen a blend of that, and I get it, I understand it, but to the extent that you can, have much of your conference live. And that means you need to have redundancies, you need to prepare for the unexpected, and yeah, pre-record it just in case. Okay. limit the presenters to the skilled. If your CEO is not a great presenter, either get him in a coach him like crazy, or just nicely say, you know what, dude, say behind the scenes. Let some of the more skilled people do this. And it doesn't matter what position it is. Have your best presenters present. And it should have not to do with rank or expertise for qualifying. Only skilled communicators should be allowed. If you have subject matter experts that are geniuses, that mumble, that are hard to understand, it just won't be very effective. Okay, ditch the text-heavy PowerPoint. Yawn. I don't even need to say anything more for that. You know how you dread those. If you want to do a PowerPoint presentation, put it on SlideShare and just let people know that it's there and they'll go read it. Another thing where folks are so busy producing the event, they forget that this is a moment in time and that there's a before and an after. Be ready for the follow-up. What do you want to have happen as a result of your virtual event? There's got to be a follow-up. If there isn't, I'm not sure why you're doing it. So polls are really helpful because polls allow you to segment your audience. You can even ask them right then, hey, would you like us to follow up on this particular subject? Yes, no, email. Boom, you've asked the question. Attendees knows, particularly since they're there for free, that there's a value exchange. If you are giving them all this content and all this good information, they know there's something expected of them. So be sure to ask. Get engagement on a very detailed level so that you can take advantage of that moving forward. Okay, one last thing. Have an offer. Generate trial with an offer. This goes back to something that I said at the beginning of this episode. If you have a free or freemium product or a light version of your product, there is nothing like having a free offer at the end to all folks who attended. They're excited now. You've got them pumped up. You brought them into the community. Put a free offer on the table that they need to act on right away. This will really help you show the value of your virtual events. All right, we're going to take a break and come right back.
Hey, it's Drew, and I was talking to a CMO the other day who had a great metaphor for helping brands get through this difficult period. And it was, think of yourself as a race car driver. You're going into a turn, and you have to slow down, but you're looking for the perfect way to sort of slingshot out, to accelerate out of the curve. With that in mind, we published on Renegade.com a new special report called 6 Ways to Drive B2B Demand Generation in a Downturn. I think if you like the show, I think you're going to really enjoy this special report. It's full of really good examples that brands have been doing in the last 6 months to get themselves in a position so that they can accelerate out of the downturn. There's 6 ideas: streamline your brand story, retool your growth engine, retrain your pit crews. I can't cover them all now. I want you to check out the report. Again, it's on Renegade.com.
Alrighty then, we are back. And so, hey, Drew, let's circle back to the overall impact of COVID on marketeers in terms of both messaging and vehicle choices. What are the trends that you are seeing? Okay, trend number 1. I just spent a lot of time talking about big virtual events. The trend that I see that's more interesting are smaller, highly targeted virtual events that have a component of education and a component of entertainment. So imagine you're targeting CEOs and you've got 12 of them lined up for a Zoom wine tasting at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. You have 12 CEOs, you have 2 that are customers, you have a great little interactive program, you have a expert from Johnny Walker Black talking about how to taste this. So there's this entertainment and educational value. Those have been performing really well. And by the way, those are particularly good for your hot prospects, the ones that already know about you, who are already in the system. And what's great about those, this is what I hear from the CMOs, is that your customer will do the selling. You don't need to do a thing because your customer can lead the conversation, and then the prospect will say, hey, well, what about this? And the customer will answer. So it's a great way to sort of get that last square few feet to the close, particularly for an enterprise sale. Okay. From a content standpoint, another trend that I'm seeing is lots more short videos. Now, short depends. I'm going to say it could be 30 seconds. It could be 5 minutes. It depends on the topic. But I'll cite Tuesday Tips, a video series that we started, I don't know, somewhere back in the summer after having all these conversations with CMOs during the CMO Huddles. We started taping Tuesday Tips. And it's become a thing. And we're getting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of views of these Tuesday Tips. And we built a little bit of a franchise with them, and people expect that. Okay. Short videos, there's another really important reason why to create all these short videos, is that the Facebooks, LinkedIn's, Twitters of the world want more video, and they tend to favor video in terms of their algorithm. Okay. Another trend, more employee advocacy, enabling it, encouraging it, and I love this trend because one of the things that we talk about a lot at Renegade is you have to create a brand that employees want to embrace. You have to have a purpose, you have to have values, and if you get those things right, your employees want to be cheerleaders for the brand. That's why they came to the company in the first place. They want to, and you need to be able to enable that. And I've seen that a lot. One, because some CMOs were resource constrained, so this was an opportunity to extend it. But you'll see that especially on LinkedIn. And it's really an interesting way of engaging employee engagement. How many of your employees who follow the brand on LinkedIn are liking and sharing the content? That can have a huge impact on a brand's social footprint because people want to engage with people, not brands, on social media. So your employees, by the way, are people. Yay! So if you can get them to engage. Now, there are platforms that help with employee advocacy, and these are doing really well. Here's a small little trend that I thought was so interesting and one that I wouldn't have considered. Most brands have some kind of swag or premiums or tchotchkes that have a big logo on them. And if you go to a conference, you're given a backpack with a big logo or a jacket. And my wife and I have this ongoing joke that I always come home with a bag with a brand on it. And I was talking to MK Gettler of Alice, which is a company that manages company stores, if you will, custom stores. And what she advises brands is if you're going to put a logo on it, make it really subtle, or just don't put a logo on it. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. Wait, what? No logo on it? Now, there are some brands where the logo is great and people feel good about it. And it's part of a badge of it. Someone cited Yeti the other day as a brand that is perfectly fine to have the logo on. But I think about it for myself, how many of these things I've thrown away. And you're just creating trash. So if you want to be responsible, so what is the point of putting your logo on it? Oh, you think it is the way they will remember the brand. Well, let me tell you a little story about that. About a year ago, make it 2 years ago, we were working with a consultant, Carrie Koenig, who is a brand consultant. Yeah, we went to a brand consultant to help us think about our brands. It's just a hint that it's always good to get a third-party opinion when you're thinking about these things. Anyway, her agency is called Inspire Fire, and when we were done with the process, Carrie sent me this wonderful plush blanket. Didn't have a brand name on it, but we still have it. We keep that in our family room. And every time I put this blanket on, I think about Carrie and Inspire Fire. No brand, great gift. You don't need it. Okay. focusing more on customer success as part of marketing. So I think lots of brands understand that customer experience is really important. One of the trends that I'm seeing is that marketers, CMOs in particular, are being asked to take control of the customer experience and customer success. And it has multiple names. But the reason for this is customers, like employees, have the potential to be advocates. And you need them. In B2B, you need every customer to be a great case history, right? You need them to be a case history. So that means communicating to them with a steady cadence, but not in a way that is painful, but in a way that is helpful. And if you have this mindset of how marketing can be a service, how it can be helpful, and you bring that to customer success, you have this wonderful, powerful formula for improving that. And so oftentimes customer success is treated almost like a sales channel. And in that case, you're just saying, oh, can I, give you fries with that? It's an upsell. It's a cross-sell thing. And they're incentivized to push the customer to buy more. Whereas what you really need this customer to do is advocate more. They'll buy more, but first they need to advocate. Okay, and the last trend that I'm seeing in 2021 is a renewed embrace of brand purpose. And I saved that for last, not because it is last, because in my mind it should go first. But I think what's happened is, as a result of COVID, a lot of companies had to examine their values, and they had to look at their purpose, and they say, why do we exist? And we really need to understand why we exist right now, because that's going to define our actions. And I really encourage you to listen to my recent episode with Stephanie Buscemi of Salesforce, because you can hear in her how their values and their purpose drove their actions. That's how they got to work.com. That's how they got to this idea of be well. I've talked a lot in other podcasts about brand purpose, but I really want to sort of tell you this is happening. And it's happening because Gen Z and millennials in particular want to work for organizations that do more than sell stuff. They want to believe that the companies they're working for have a purpose and are contributing to society in important ways. Okay, we're getting near the end of this show at least, but here's another question for you. Hey, Drew, can you explain what you mean by brand purpose and why that is so important right now? Okay. So let me tell you more about the Salesforce story. And I'm going to quote Stephanie. She says, our two brand values that I want to share at this moment are customer success and trust. Now, trust, this is Stephanie speaking, now trust goes beyond just the transparency of having and putting your data in the cloud. It's from how we conduct ourselves in every interaction with our customers and our ecosystem and our community. But trust was really core to starting the company's success and taking off and convincing people that it would be okay to put your data in the cloud. Okay, interesting. And then she goes on to say, the purpose of the company is that business is a platform for change. Our purpose is that our success is only through our customer success and through our communities in which we serve successfully. So think about that. Business is a platform for change. Salesforce is the enabler of it. So they're sort of saying our purpose is to help other businesses have their purpose and bring that to life. I think it's such an interesting way of looking at your business. Brands need to stand for something. Without purpose, it's really hard to generate brand love. Consumers are looking to business to lead us out of this quagmire. They don't trust government. There's a lot of institutions that they don't trust, but they actually at this moment, according to the Edelman Trust Barometer, trust business more than almost any other source. So given that trust, businesses have an opportunity to do and make meaningful change. Okay, a couple more questions. What do you think is going to be part of the new normal for marketeers. Okay, we can get through this pretty quickly. One, empathy. There are no more all business leaders. I mentioned that in an earlier podcast, the silver lining for CMOs. But I really want to emphasize this idea of empathy and why this is so important right now. We've all gone through a global tragedy of epic proportions, and we're still in the middle of this thing. And if you don't stop and think about that almost every day and see how it's impacting the lives of the people that you're talking about, you're just tone deaf, as they say. You're out of touch. So empathy is not going to go away. We've come to know our friends, our clients like friends. We know their dog's name. We know their kids. We know their routines. It's a new part of business. Business and personal lives have blurred, and the empathy that comes with successful leadership is critical. All right. From that big picture personality aspect, one thing we anticipate towards the end of 2021 are the return of physical events, and when that happens, they will be hybrid events, both physical and virtual. It's going to add some more costs because you're going to have all sorts of live streaming equipment and technology, but people are getting used to this virtual event thing, and you can build from it. There's no doubt in my mind that there will be hybrid workforces. You'll have remote and on-premise. Something like 20 to 30% of the service economy businesses like ours are expected to stay remote forever. And then another new normal is an awareness of the importance of diversity and inclusion in all aspects of your business. And this extends to marketing materials. And Stephanie Buscemi mentioned this, that they did an audit and discovered, whoa, our marketing materials are not featuring diverse people. It is something that we all marketers need to be aware of and help our organizations take a step forward and accept responsibility for creating a diverse and more effective workforce as a result. Okay, a couple more questions, I guess. Hey, Drew, since you mentioned diversity, let's talk a bit about racial injustice and what companies are doing to address this issue at their own companies. Boy, I tell you, we had CMO Huddles in May and June, and all we talked about was the challenge of this challenge of building a more diverse workforce. And initially, a number of CMOs said, well, the challenge is supply. We simply don't see enough diverse candidates for the marketing department. At which point there was a switch that went off, and the other CMOs said, we're not trying hard enough. We're not recruiting from the right places. We have a lens that sort of accepts white privilege. We're just not working hard enough. So it can't be done with one initiative. You can't just say, okay, we care. It is a journey. And if I had a little more time, I'd tell you about my personal journey and the things that I am doing. But I recognize that it is not going to be something that is going to just go away. And as someone said, I can't remember who, white people created this problem. White people need to fix this. One thing I will tell you on this topic of diversity is you need to create a culture that embraces diversity and recognizes aggression when it's there and acknowledges it and teaches people to be aware of things they don't even realize they're aware of. Okay, so and I had a conversation with an African-American CMO, very senior gentleman, and he told a very sad story to me. He said, look, I get calls all the time from senior executives at other companies that have worked with me and said, hey, would you mind, say, helping my kid get an internship or something like that at the company he was working at? And he said, sure, no problem. But then I thought, would I make that call to them and say, hey, And he said, no, I wouldn't, because I am certain they wouldn't be looking out for and recognize the challenges that my black kids are going to be facing in a predominantly white organization. And that story made me really sad, but it also made me recognize there's a whole new generation that really is ready to embrace this. And we simply need, as a society, as businesses who can drive change, to recognize the problem and put a plan together and stick to it. Okay. I think we can wrap up with 2 more questions. Okay. Hey, Drew, how do you think content consumption has changed? So I seem to recall one pundit saying that the pandemic didn't cause trends, it just accelerated them. And we certainly know that from a marketing technology standpoint. Oh my God. We knew that live streaming or streaming of content was going to go crazy. Sure enough, look what happened with Netflix and Disney and oh my God, just all these channels. We know that people were already moving from print to digital to desktops to mobile, that mobile gaming was going to be huge, and the video consumption in general. What's interesting, though, is TV hours rose significantly as well. And audio rose. And believe it or not, and this is the most surprising thing, book sales went up. And so all of this means is that as a content marketer, the quality of the content that is out there is pretty extraordinary from an entertainment standpoint. I mean, I talk about this all the time. There is too much good television. And I want to read a book now and then. And if I just watched the programs, I never would. So the litmus test for you is your content remarkable? Gets us to the next question. Where does content fit in the overall digital strategy, and how has that changed? Well, with physical events off the table, content marketing has become even more important to the overall plan. Content is kind of the glue. It's almost everything right now in a digital plan. But what's interesting to me is there's still an ad hoc approach to content. We need to be thought leaders. We need to demonstrate category leadership. That's not a strategy. Thought leadership is not a strategy. That's an outcome that happens if you actually have a strategic decision that for these people, we are going to help them do something. But, the problem with thought leadership is, hey, we're smart, we know everything. Let's turn this around and say, what is our content doing for our customers or our prospects that is helpful? Right? That's not thought leadership. That's helpful content. That may fall closer to this category of sales enablement. So thought leadership isn't a strategy. Being helpful is, and that means listening to your customers and really trying to understand what content will help them and being a step ahead of them. Interestingly, I had a recent interview with William Tyree of Ring DNA. They made the decision to buy Andy Paul's podcast and Andy Paul's company in order to have a massive sales library. And this had started as a result of a B2B influencer strategy that they had been part of for years. And so now they have this podcast library that acts as an ability where they can promote certain events or things that they have on the calendar. They literally have a channel. But they also have this newfound authority because Andy Paul is one of the most recognized and most popular sales podcasts in the world. And now this is part of their brand. That's a bold step forward. It's a remarkable step because Andy's show is remarkable. Okay. I think we're getting close to the end. I'm going to ask one more question. Let's see. Okay. Hey, Drew, you host Tuesday Tips with CMOs. What are some of their top tips? Well, every Tuesday tip has a specific message. So it's hard to explain and sort of say, the top tips are the top tips. But I will say that I hear some common themes across them. First, listen to your customers. And there are lots of ways to do that. You can listen on social. You can set up an advisory board. You can poll them. But this information that you can get can drive the social content that you create. It can drive all the content you can create. It can drive product development. It can help you with pricing. So listening informs almost all of the tips. A second part of that is consulting with your customers. It's one thing to passively listen. It's another thing to go out to your customers and ask them, hey, what do you think of this piece of content? What do you think of this idea? What do you think of this topic? It makes them feel important. It makes them feel part of your brand. And I guess the next part of this is, by listening to your customer and consulting with them, you create the opportunity is to celebrate your customer. Feature them in your content, build community around them. Boy, Marketo, Tableau, Drift, 6 Sense, there's so many examples of companies that have done really, really well as a result of celebrating their customers. All right, that's it. Thank you for listening to this special show. Renegade Thinkers Unite is written and directed by Drew Neiser. Hey, that's me. Audio production is by Sam Beck. Show notes are written by Melissa Caffrey. The music is by the amazing Burns Twins, and the intro voiceover is Linda Cornelius. To find the transcripts of all episodes, suggest future guests, or learn more about quite possibly the savviest B2B marketing agency in New York City, visit renegade.com. And until next time, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.